and Wilson was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff interviewed by my senior scientist colleague, Eric Davis. Since it discusses potentially ongoing programs, I have no comment. Now, unquote. Let me repeat the most critical portion of that again, of what he said. So, quote, and Wilson was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff interviewed by my senior scientist colleague, Eric Davis. So basically, he's admitting that Eric Davis interviewed Admiral Wilson. There's, no other way to look at that. To be fair to Puthoff, I want to say that, yes, he later denied that he was officially admitting to the authenticity of the document, and he claimed that he was just repeating the question that he was asked because the room was very noisy. But I don't buy that. His statement was extremely clear, extremely specific. And as far as I'm concerned, he has admitted that this document is real and that Eric Davis really did interview Admiral Wilson. And realistically, for anyone who looks at this statement objectively, there's no way he can take this back.
Well, may I offer my own take on it? Because I was the one who immediately asked Hal Puthoff about that after he made that statement. And I asked him the same thing. I said, did you just confirm the authenticity of this document? And the thing about him, Hal Puthoff is a very, very careful man. He words everything he says on everything with ultra precision, and he's quite expert at not revealing more than he wants to reveal. Now, I agree with you in that, if you just listen to the transcript of what he said, it seems to me exactly as you say as well, that he was just putting it out there and saying, yep, this is it. He said to me, no, I was simply restating the question. And I didn't want to argue with him because I respect him and I like him, but I don't think that I was fully convinced of that either. And I just kind of let it go with him. But it did seem to me that maybe he was just tired. I think maybe that was it. But on the other hand, it's not like him under any circumstances, as far as I know, to let his guard down. So I'm of two minds about that. That's all.
Here's the thing. We know this document is real from all the other evidence. And when we combine that with, the specific statement he made, he wasn't just repeating the question. That is just absurd. And I understand. I'm not mad at him about this. I'm not upset with him about this because from his point of view, he's trying to protect himself and he's trying, to do what he thinks is required,
right.
Ensure he keeps his clearance. But, looking at this rationally, with everything else we know, it's just obvious he wasn't repeating the question and he was tired, he was exhausted, and he let this slip out. That's just, my view of this, and I think it is the most rational way to view this.
I think it's entirely likely. I think it's entirely possible, yeah.
Well, now to move on, I want to talk about another piece of evidence we have that confirms this document is real. Melinda Leslie, she's a UFO researcher. She's an alien abductee, and I believe she really is. And she's a MILAB victim, a military abduction victim. And we know that she's actually had a, meeting with Jim Simivan. He's the vice president of To the Stars Academy. And she has had at least one in-person meeting with him and his wife. And she's had multiple phone calls with Jim Simivan. And she has given a public account in the past. And she has repeated this on a few different programs about how she called Jim Simivan and asked him specifically about this document. And basically, he issued like a 20-minute, oddly worded non-denial of this document.
I think she even said it was, didn't she say 43 minutes? I think she had it exactly.
I think she's given she talked, it was like a 43-minute phone call. But I
okay.
say that she
Right. Okay.
But they discussed this document for 20 minutes, and during that 20 minutes, she gave him multiple opportunities to disavow it. In every way she could word it, she was trying to give him a window to just say it's fake, it's not real,
and he did not do it,
and he would not do it. And she just, the only real detail of exactly what he said was that, he repeated that some of them have security clearances and that they are not allowed to speak about potentially ongoing classified programs when you're holding a security clearance. And he did not deny it. He did not say it wasn't real. He just continued to basically wiggle around the issue. And if this was not a real document, he would have just said, nope, it's not real. Move on. There's better stuff to look at. But he did not say that, because this document is real and he knows it, and everyone at To the Stars Academy knows it.
It's important to keep this point stressed, which is that, a number of the very obstinate skeptics about this document are continually saying, well, they've denied. And the fact is, no one has denied it. No one has denied it. Wilson is the only one who has actually, to my knowledge, actively denied certain things. Like he said, well, I wouldn't recognize Eric Davis if I met him, and things like this. He's made many absolute denials, but no one. But of course, you would expect that with him, because he's, of all of these people involved, he's truly the only one with direct connection to the program. So everything else is, another step removed. So Wilson presumably has a much more stringent set of rules and protocols that he has to live by in order to kind of keep going in this. So one would think he has to make active denials, but no one else has made any active denial of this document.
And also, I want to point out something else, and I'm not pointing a finger at you, because members of To the Stars Academy have talked to multiple researchers, and you have actually stated before that from one individual in To the Stars, you received a public answer and then a private confidential answer, which you could not share.
Well, it wasn't from To the Stars. It was Kit Green, who is close to those people.
He's part of their extended network. He worked with them exclusively, very closely in the past. He was involved in Putoff's remote viewing work. All this stuff that happened in the 70s. Right. And
Green and Putoff have been very close for many, many years. That's true. You could maybe call Green an honorary member. I don't think he would agree with that, by the way. I think he's quite critical of a lot of the things that they do. But he is, for the record, he is the one who gave me an official and unofficial answer to the authenticity of the Wilson document. And I'll only add, his official answer was true to Kit Green's form, because he is an ultra precise, exact man in everything that he says. His statement was, well, the fact that I've seen it, the fact that I have opinions about it, I don't have it in front of me, but he said, the fact that I've seen it and whatever I think about it doesn't matter, because I'm not prepared to, I'm not able to talk about its authenticity, and I can't do that, and I won't do that. And then he gave me an unofficial answer, which I've said many times lasted for about 20 minutes, and which I agreed I wouldn't say what that unofficial answer was, but I am allowed to say that he gave me an unofficial answer. And the only thing that I'm just saying is, after all of that, I clearly have never changed my opinion that this is an authentic document. So I'm leaving it at that, because out of respect. But the other thing that I should add, which adds to the authenticity of this, is when the Wilson document wasn't the only document of significance that leaked out of the Edgar Mitchell estate. The other main one that caught a lot of attention at the time was the so-called alien autopsy email thread. And I'm not here to talk about whatever the authenticity or not of that alien autopsy, the Ray Santilli thing was, but the fact is that same group of people, in other words, Green, Davis, Combe Kelleher, Putoff, all of them were on this email thread, John Alexander as well. And they were talking about the authenticity of that. And when that came out, I asked Kit Green, because there were people saying, well, that's fake. That's not a real thing. first question I asked Kit Green about relating to that email thread is it authentic? And his answer was absolutely, it's authentic. So he completely confirmed the authenticity of that. And that, came out with the with the Wilson notes. So, I mean, I just tell people with reasonable intellect, do the math here, figure it out.
And there are multiple researchers, at least one in addition to James Rigney, who have seen the whole collection of these documents that came from Edgar Mitchell's estate. So there's no doubt about this. The alien autopsy email is just one out of many, many documents. And I'm not going to say they're all UFO related, but out of a huge collection of documents, that's just one of them.
Can I ask you?
Go ahead.
Because I am not one of those people who's seen the whole collection at all. And, many of us have been curious about the quality of the remainder of the documents that are there. The impression, or what limited information I got, is that there aren't too many other really earth-shattering documents in there. Have you been able to get a sense of the quality of what are the remainder of these documents?
There's interesting stuff that's not been published yet. That's interesting. That would probably be interesting to different people that specialize in different segments of ufology. Mm-hmm. However, I would say that from what I can gather, the Admiral Wilson document is probably the most important document.
Okay.
In the whole collection.
This is what I was led to understand also.
And I also just wanted to say one other thing, going back briefly to the whole public answer, private answer thing. I just wanted to say there are multiple other researchers who have gotten private answers. And just like you, it did not change their position in support of this document. So you're not alone. That's the main point I was trying to make. Members of To the Stars Academy and people connected, in this network have made statements to people, public and then a private one. And the private one doesn't negate their, confidence in the authenticity of this document whatsoever. So I just wanted to state that.
So can we jump into the document itself? And I think we're pretty good with the authenticity of this.
Well, there's a couple other major things that have came out recently. We really have to get into, because, for example, this is an older piece of evidence, but we really need to go through this. This is from an interview that Edgar Mitchell had with Larry King on July 4th, 2008. And I'm going to read this quote from Edgar Mitchell. Well, I eventually went to the Pentagon and asked for a meeting with the Intelligence Committee of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which I got with another naval officer who had many similar experience, and we told their story. And this gentleman, a vice admiral, said to us, well, I don't know about that, but I'm going to find out. Now, I'm going to stop this quote for a second before I continue. So this is proof from Edgar Mitchell himself that Admiral Wilson had an interest in this subject, and he was going to find out. This is in direct contradiction to some of his denials, where he acts like he was only begrudgingly allowing them to have the meeting. Instead, we know here from Edgar Mitchell, a national American hero, a very credible man, that Admiral Wilson was going to find out about the truth about these programs. So now we'll continue with this quote. And called a few weeks later, he's talking about, Admiral Wilson calling now. So, and called a few weeks later and said he had found the source of the black budget funding for this project, and that he was going to subsequently investigate, because if it was real, he should know about it. As a matter of fact, he should actually be in charge. Those were his words, unquote.
And now in 2008.
Yes, in 2008 on Larry King Live. And now the most important part of what he said on the show is next. And this has direct relevance. So, quote, and so we did get calls from some time later, and a report much later than that he had found the people responsible for the cover-up and for the people who were in the know and were told, I'm sorry, Admiral, you do not have the need to know here, and so goodbye. Unquote.
The report much later than that. That's clearly Davis's notes from 2002.
Yes, there's no doubt about
That's right. Yeah, he's actually referring to the notes there.
And now this is something else that was found just a few days ago. This was an interview that H Plus magazine conducted with Edgar Mitchell from
this is important, yeah.
Yep, from October 18th, 2010. So this is again with Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon. Someone give this quote from Edgar Mitchell. Subsequently, another contact of mine, who must also remain nameless because he's on classified programs, encountered the Admiral in Las Vegas, where he had been looking for and trying to get into the so-called strategic access program around the UFO incident and had been denied. So right here, we know that one of Edgar Mitchell's associates, who must have been Eric Davis, met with the Admiral in Las Vegas. Unless you believe something as idiotic as this document being an amateur movie script, which obviously it's not, it does not look like that at all, then this makes it clear that the meeting between Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson did indeed happen. Let me read this little bit of this quote one more time because it's so important to this, because it completely refutes Admiral Wilson's denials. Subsequently, another contact of mine, who must also remain nameless because he's on classified programs, encountered the Admiral in Las Vegas, where he had been looking for and trying to get into the strategic access program around the UFO incident and had been denied. So basically, right there is proof that this meeting between Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson happened, and these denials that Admiral Wilson has been providing over the years and recently are basically untrue.
That's kind of amazed at how some of these researchers are reacting. Wilson said, well, I wasn't in Las Vegas. In fact, he said, I hadn't been in Las Vegas since, I think he said something like close to 1980, which actually seems really odd for someone at that level of society not to have been in Las Vegas for that many decades. But that's another story. But based on that one denial, there are people willing to say, oh, okay, great. Then you clearly... then the document's clearly fake. If you say that you were not in Las Vegas.
Well, the individual saying this document is fake, and I hate even talking about these individuals because they want the attention. They're making all this noise to try to drum up attention for themselves, to get views for their website, to get people to watch their videos. But they have been attacking this document since day one. They have an agenda. They're not sincere researchers. They are attempting to discredit everything about this document because some of them, I won't say all of them, have been attacking to the Stars Academy ever since it emerged on the scene. So they have an agenda to attack this document because if hypothetically, which it's not going to happen because this document is real, if this document was somehow discredited, it would make members such as Hal Puthoff of To the Stars Academy look bad for falling for it. So they are hoping that they can, plant seeds of fear and uncertainty and doubt in the UFO community about this document when there's nothing, less than completely authentic about this document. There's nothing on this document that indicates it's false, yet they are continually trying to debunk it. They don't deserve our time. They don't deserve our respect, and we need to move on and ignore them, because speaking with these individuals is completely unproductive because they are set in their ways. They've decided exactly how they are going to move forward, and they are never going to admit this document is real until, someone like Admiral Wilson actually steps forward and admits the meeting took place, which I actually hope he does indeed do.
Doesn't look like he will. That doesn't seem like that's going to happen.
We don't know. There's so much happening right now in the world, and we can talk about this later because we need to hurry up and kind of move on. There's so much happening in the world right now. He may. So there's yet another amazing piece of evidence that this document is authentic. That just came out a little while back, maybe a week ago, and this has to be talked about. Dr. Bob Maguire. He's an administrator on your forum on Richard Dolan members. He is also
that is by far the least of his accomplishments. He is an extremely accomplished man. Yes, but he is the lead moderator of my website.
Oh yeah, he's a PhD mathematician. He's a retired professor from Virginia Tech University. He had also been a member of the Institute for Defense Analysis. He has started up multiple companies. He has had extensive interaction throughout his career in the intelligence apparatus with the Department of Defense. He has, done services for various intelligence agencies, various three-letter agencies. There's a bunch of them. And during his career, working for these intelligence networks and so forth, he actually knew Admiral Wilson professionally. He wasn't best buddies with him. He didn't go golfing with him, but he knew him professionally from the work he was doing. Okay. When Admiral Wilson was DIA director, he knew him. And so Bob Maguire has actually, recently shared evidence that, again, confirms that this meeting did take place. Specifically, what Bob is telling us is that around 2004 or 2005, Bob Maguire was in a three-letter agency. That's all he'll say. He won't identify which agency it was, at a classified meeting when a friend of his came up to him and asked if he could go into his office with him for a moment. His friend, saying Bob Maguire's friend, in his office showed him a letter from Admiral Wilson, signed by Admiral Wilson, which
this is not an email. This is a physical letter.
It's not an email. It's a letter. And I'm going to get to that in a second. This letter from Admiral Wilson, which mentioned the meeting with Eric Davis that took place and the subject matter discussed during their meeting in Las Vegas. Also, Bob Maguire claims that from the way the letter looked, and remember, this guy has experience dealing with, information security and the way the intelligence community operates and how they distribute, classified information. He claims that the way this letter looked, he thinks it was conveyed by hand by a private secure courier. It wasn't posted in the mail. It was actually transported by hand to this individual that took him into his office.
Oh, that's interesting.
And
I didn't get that detail. That's interesting.
Yes. And so what's also important is that in this letter, he doesn't remember all the details because this has been years. And it's not like he sat there for hours studying this letter. Okay. He basically, read it and probably gave it back to the guy. But he remembers that it was about Admiral Wilson was attempting to seek assistance getting access to the UFO related unacknowledged special access programs that he had previously been denied to. And this is really fascinating for a bunch of different reasons, but I particularly find it interesting because it indicates that Admiral Wilson had started once again attempting to gain access to these programs.
Yeah, he wasn't giving up.
No, he wasn't. Even after his retirement from the military and after his meeting with Eric Davis, he was still trying to get assistance. That's why he wrote the letter to this individual, okay, this fairly high-level official in this three-letter agency to try to get assistance to get access to these programs.
I'll point out that Bob first he mentioned this in an interview, which I think is at ufojoe.org, Joe Murgia's site, I think. And then also
.net.
.net, thank you. And then talked about this on a panel that I did that was hosted by Grant Cameron, and that can be found on Grant's YouTube channel as well as my YouTube channel. We've got it here as well, and you can hear Bob talk about his interaction with that letter. But he ended up telling you a bit more privately, and he actually told me a bit more privately as well. But I want you to tell this story.
But that's basically what Bob told me. But it matches very precisely with the statement from Edgar Mitchell with H Plus magazine that Admiral Wilson was in Las Vegas when he was there, with Eric Davis, among many other reasons, to attempt to gain access to the special access programs.
Well, then let me add one thing that Bob told me that he said as a result of this, because his friend showed him the letter essentially asking for advice. So the thing was, I just got this request from Admiral Wilson, and this colleague of Bob Maguire was someone with very, very outstanding capabilities to do inquiry. This is why Wilson was asking him, apparently. And this man was asking Bob Maguire, what should I do here? And Bob told me, he said, my best advice to you is run. Don't get involved in this. Don't try to help. If you can avoid it, you should avoid it. Bob said to me that he does not know what the result of any of that was. So he doesn't know if his friend helped Wilson or not. He never really got any follow-up, he said.
Okay.
So that's what I learned not long ago from Bob Maguire.
Well, thank you for sharing that last little bit. I did not hear that, so that's awesome. You could include that. Now, finally, before we get to the meat of the document, there's one more important piece of evidence straight from Dr. Eric Davis himself. We have the words of Dr. Eric Davis from an interview with Stephen Greenstreet of the Basement Office.
Oh, yes, this is important too.
In which Stephen Greenstreet is asking him about the Admiral Wilson document and even flashing the document, in front of him on the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric Davis states the following, quote, leaked out of Ed Mitchell's estate. But then he ends up saying, I'm not at liberty to discuss them because they could contain information about ongoing programs, blah, blah, blah. But he admits that it leaked out of Ed Mitchell's estate. So that is directly from him. Also, as the interview progresses, he mentions he cannot discuss them because the Obama administration and now the Trump administration vigorously prosecutes anyone with a security clearance who goes out of their way to discuss leaked documents. And there's another little point here, because on UFO Joe's website at ufojoe.net, he gets a statement from Eric Davis where he admits the statement from Eric Davis is on the website. You can read it, where he tells Joe that when the Admiral Wilson document leaked out, he consulted with a national security expert to find out the consequences of someone with the security clearance speaking about classified documents. So if this document was fake, when it leaked out, why would he need to consult with a national security expert? Okay, now, after all of this... Yeah,
because if it's clearly connected to him, he would know immediately whether he wrote it or not. So if he knows that he didn't write it, why would he even be worried about it in the least, right?
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, if this was a movie script, a pathetically amateurish movie script, then he wouldn't need a security consultant, to ask about legal issues. It's just absurd.
Yes.
And there's more evidence that we haven't even touched on. We're not going to get into because we don't have time. But basically, just to conclude this section of the interview, I want to say that this is a completely authentic document. There's more than enough evidence to prove that beyond any reasonable doubt. This is not a fake document written by an intelligence agency. There's people that claim Rick Doty faked this document.
Are you serious? Are people actually saying that he did this?
They might not say it exactly the way I did, but they try to say that, this is on the same order as all the MJ-12 documents, that have leaked over the years. They try to say Doty was probably involved in this, or the Air Force Office of Special Investigations created this hoax to manipulate the UFO community. to distribute disinformation. Literally, they say that, and it's absurd, and this is not a false account by Davis to impress his peers and NIDS. That would be stupid. They were a serious group of researchers, and he had a serious boss with Robert Bigelow and NIDS who would not tolerate that. Again, he would have been skinned alive if he had faked this document. And this is not a movie script. This is the real deal. This is the most important piece of UFO evidence ever obtained by the community, and it is nothing less than exactly how you described it, the UFO leak of the century, and it's going to be, in my opinion, the leak that actually is the catalyst that brings down these special access programs once and for all and ends the truth embargo, this atrocity that's been going on for 80 years. Now, I have to calm down for a second. I get riled up about this somehow.
Take a breath.
Yes, I'm going to take a breath.
I just, on a personal level, I agree with the statement that I made over a year ago that it is the UFO leak of the century. And I think the implications of this are absolutely profound. And whether or not it actually will result in that is in breaking through the wall of secrecy, that remains to be seen. But I will say this: when I was given the bare bones of this story back in 2006, and I was able to gather together enough information to reach Admiral Wilson myself and to call him up on the phone. I was able to arrange this with him because I thought, well, I just have to talk to him about it. And this is something I've mentioned many times. I don't need to recount the whole thing here. But after we had our encounter on the phone, and after he said his memory was foggy, and then after I made clear to him that this meeting happened, and I told him why, and he admitted that it happened, but that everything else was poppycock. That is, everything else being the whole extravaganza of trying to get access to black budget programs and being denied. And then he hung up the phone. I wrote back to my original source on all of this, and I said, yeah, got to Wilson. He denied the whole thing. And my source, the person who showed me those documents to begin with, those 2 pages of the documents, said, well, what do you expect? He's obviously not going to give away that information. That brings down the whole edifice. That brings down the entire structure of secrecy, which we both knew. I mean, it was obvious. I knew full well going into that conversation with Admiral Wilson that he was not going to give me a thing because he couldn't afford to give me a thing, because admitting that, here is a man who was deputy head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff being denied access to the UFO program. I mean, even in 2006, I remember thinking, how could he possibly acknowledge that to me? There's nothing that would allow him to do that. And of course he didn't. But my source just very matter-of-factly said, yeah, well, why would you expect him to? So just thought I'd add that in.
Okay. So let's get into the meat of this document. Let's jump right in. Page 1 of the document. Starting with page 1, the document at the very top is dated 10/16/02, and it reads, Eric Davis meeting with Admiral Wilson. And for the record, it does not say movie script for a new television series about a fictional Adam Wilson. No, this was a real meeting with Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson. Now, Eric Davis, on this page, you'll see how Eric Davis tells how he was told to meet Admiral Wilson at the EG&G Special Projects Building at Greer in Paradise at 10 a.m. in order not to be late. Yes, EG&G is a real company. There's going to be some skeptics out there that probably say it didn't exist. Yes, it did. There are people that brain dead. So it did indeed exist. You can actually go back on various websites and see the sign for this EG&G Special Projects. That's exactly what the sign read back then before EG&G was bought out by another company. So you can actually see photographs of the parking lot where all this took place. It's kind of really neat if you know the websites to go to. But it turns out that as you go through this first page, the Admiral is the one who's actually late. But he eventually shows up. He's actually in a suit rather than his military uniform, since obviously he's retired. And he arrives with a lieutenant, a commander, and a petty officer who drove the car. The officers, other than Admiral Wilson, because he's retired, depart to the building. So Eric Davis, I'm assuming, got out of his car and went into the staff car with Admiral Wilson, and they begin a conversation that ends up lasting from approximately 10:10 a.m. to 11:20 a.m., or an hour and 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Immediately, Thomas Wilson starts telling him about how he figured out who he was after reading his resume. He said he looked at the U.S. Uniformed Services ID copy, his Air Force orders, and other information. They immediately bypassed the chit-chat, and Admiral Wilson states that he knows Davis doesn't want to talk about his career or the history of the Defense Intelligence Agency. He knows why Davis wants to meet him. And he goes on to say that how he's a big fan of a man named Oak Shannon, who helped convince him to have the meeting with Eric Davis. And he continues on to mention the topics he discussed with Willard Miller during the briefing in the Pentagon on April 9th, 1997, and how they spoke for 2 hours, after it was officially over, and discussed UFOs, MJ-12, Roswell, crashed UFOs, alien bodies, all that kind of stuff.
Now, for the record, this was something that Miller never said publicly. Yes. In his interview with Greer from, I think it was 2013, they're talking about that, but they explicitly avoided that. But of course, he would avoid that, obviously.
Well, we'll say Dr. Stephen Greer has stated that that Admiral Wilson canceled 1 or 2 additional appointments because he wanted even more information, and it extended until Edgar Mitchell actually had another appointment, and Edgar Mitchell had to leave, and that's what finally, according to Stephen Greer, this is his version, kind of brought it to an eventual close after Edgar Mitchell left. So to move on and stick with what's actually in this document, Wilson admits that he was fascinated with what Willard Miller was telling him because he knew about some U.S. military close encounters with UFOs as well as foreign government encounters because he had looked at the records. And that's kind of interesting that he was already familiar with these UFO incidents, not crash recoveries, not reverse engineering, but, just objects that were encountered probably by pilots or radar systems or stuff like that. Now, near the bottom of the page, it goes on to say that Miller asked him about MJ-12 or a similar UFO control group or cabal. And he asked him about this not at the Pentagon meeting, but later on, after he had actually looked for these programs, after the events of this document played out. And he admits that he told Miller that he was right, that such an organization did indeed exist. This makes total sense due to the NRO memo that was provided to him by Dr. Stephen Greer that included the code names Maj Ops, M-A-J, and Magi Ops, M-A-J-I. So if we go to page 2, we will see that Admiral Wilson details that he told Miller where he had looked for the UFO programs and who he talked to, but did not name everyone. Eric Davis then shows Admiral Wilson the 2-page letter from Willard Miller that's included in these documents, the Admiral Wilson documents. And Admiral Wilson laughs, it says, and tells him that he didn't tell Miller everything. He goes on to say that Willard Miller can make good, educated guesses on which contractors have alien hardware, but advises them not to pay Miller for the research he offers to conduct on their behalf. And he makes a comment about Willard Miller needing to pay for his beachfront property or a private beach privilege. And what's interesting is UFO Joe had actually been to his house, and it's not on the beach. So,
and just to flesh out the letter, it's a letter by Miller to Putoff and Davis, offering his services to in my interpretation, it basically helped him get to the center of the labyrinth and to find out more about the structure of this UFO secrecy.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
because
mean, that's
basically, if you go through this entire document, the letter from Willard Miller is pages 3 and 4. And that's what we're switching over to right now.
Yeah.
We have to also state, to be fair, that Willard Miller does not admit to writing this letter, at least not publicly. We don't know what he has said to certain parties privately, but we do know he wrote it. That's obvious, even though he denies it. What he has told certain researchers publicly is that he doesn't remember it. It reminds me so much of Admiral Wilson's foggy memory statement. When you were talking with him, when you called him, how he said, "Oh, my memory is foggy." It reminds me of that so much. And
that's the thing about it. It's not, I really didn't take any of his statements as explicit denial so much as I don't remember.
Yes.
That's what you really get from those.
Yep. And also Willard Miller told a couple other researchers that he thinks this letter looks like a copy and paste job by someone who had access to a collection of his correspondence, but I don't really buy that either.
And who would that be?
The only possibility for that, I think, would be Stephen Greer, but I don't think Stephen Greer hoaxed this. That would be absurd. So there's really no one that could do that.
Well, I'm just going to say once again, it's not a Greer hoax, because I am adamant, and I'm not giving up the name of this person, but I was shown 2 pages of the transcript of that exact document in 2006.
Well,
right? This has been circulating for a long time.
If this was a hoax by Stephen Greer, the whole NIDS to the Stars organization would not be issuing these non-denials. They would say instantly that it was a hoax, but they don't.
They would.
So, so to move on, if you read through this letter, you will see how he does not want his name associated with any potential research he does for Eric Davis or Hal Puthoff, who this letter is addressed to. It's actually addressed to Eric Davis, but he mentions Hal Puthoff.
Yeah.
And it becomes apparent why he is denying that he wrote this letter, because he mentions he doesn't want his name affiliated with any of this. Exactly. Also, we know that in the Admiral Wilson document that we're talking about today, Wilson, expresses how he felt betrayed by Willard Miller for sharing what he told him. So it's logical that Willard Miller doesn't want to again betray him in a weird sort of way by admitting this document is real.
Absolutely.
Which would convey authenticity to the entire document that would put additional pressure on Wilson. So that's why Willard Miller is, denying this. Of course, I believe Willard Miller really, he needs to come forward and just admit it, because everybody knows this overall document is real. So he just needs to say what the truth is. But as you go through this document, Miller mentions that there's a scientist by the name of Bob Beckwith, and he has personal theories of physics, and he has proposed a bunch of different experiments and levitation, teleportation, and time travel. And he wants to know if Eric Davis or Hal Puthoff would like to meet with this individual. I've actually looked up this guy online. He was a real individual. I don't think people, I've not studied his theories. I don't think people need to focus too much on this name, or what, it mentioning, levitation, teleportation, time travel. Right now, that's not a big deal when it comes to the authenticity of this letter. This is a side issue. All people need to know is there was a Bob Beckwith or Robert Beckwith. He did have these theories. You can find his website on the Wayback Machine. He has patents online about his theories. So he was a real person, and that gives some credibility to this letter. Then Willard Miller moves on, and he says that he's willing to assist Eric and Hal in the research into crash retrievals and the entities within the government, and he says, or outside of it, that are involved in that business. However, he gives yet another warning, and he mentions, I'm reading right here, there must be absolutely no mention or association with his name. And he states that he has absolutely nothing to gain from such an association and possibly much to lose. He goes on now and he talks about how much he would charge them per hour for his work, and it wouldn't take a bunch of hours. I think he mentions it was, $180 per straight time hour. And he starts to list some of the information he could provide, which included, he mentions a special team that helped recover crashed craft. Then he goes on to mention the name. He doesn't give the name, but he's offering to provide this to them if they agree to this. The name of a senior officer who he believed had firsthand knowledge of U.S. government alien reproduction vehicles at Area 51 and other locations. Information about a senior flag rank officer, that would mean a general, who was directly involved in a significant UFO event on the East Coast of the United States. I also want to say an admiral, I actually looked this up, an admiral could also be considered a flag rank officer. So that could have been an admiral. Also, he mentions a list of civilian government contractors who he thinks would have knowledge of United States government work in alien-derived technologies, crashes, landings, and so forth. One thing I want to point out is when he mentions alien reproduction vehicle, we don't know for sure if he is speaking about the specific Fluxliner ARV alien reproduction vehicle that was witnessed in person by Bradford Sorensen and Lockheed's hangar in Palmdale in the 1980s, or if he is just referencing, alien reproduction vehicles or back-engineered vehicles.
Yes, a good point. Is it a generic term, or is he actually referring to the ARV story connected with Brad Sorensen and made public really by Mark McCandlish through Stephen Greer in Greer's book on called Disclosure from about 20 years ago. It's a famous story among researchers, and it's one that I personally place credence in. And it's this claim, this idea that the U.S. black budget community had been working on these craft for a long time, and even by 1988 that they had definite success, some level of success in creating their version of these, hence the phrase alien reproduction vehicle, ARV. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I urge everyone, James Higgins, which was a SCAD student, that's Savannah College of Art and Design SCAD student. He was trying to get his degree in filmmaking, and he made this documentary, and it's titled 0 Point, the Fluxliner ARV. It's on YouTube. You can watch it for free. It's very well made, lots of graphics, interviews with a number of different witnesses, interviews with Mark McCandlish. It's fantastic. Mm-hmm. So I would urge you to look up 0 Point, the Fluxliner ARV. I also want to say that he may actually have died for making this film because he ended up getting cancer before he was finished with it. And shortly thereafter, he passed away. And it turned out, and the information about the analysis of his blood or whatever is online. So you can read this. The toxicology report, I should say, indicates that he had heavy metal poisoning. He had very high levels of heavy metals in his blood. So there's, we don't know for certain.
I just want to point out, I knew this man, but I didn't know him under the name James Higgins. I knew him as James Allen. So I think James Allen was his pseudonym. Is that right?
Yes, James Allen was a pseudonym.
I want to point out, he was someone that I actually became friends with him over a number of phone conversations. And I had a number of very, very long and involved and incredibly fruitful conversations for him, which I will always be grateful. He provided a good amount of technical and scientific insight to me when I was writing part of UFOs for the 21st Century Mind. And I included a thanks to him in the acknowledgments of that book. I had him listed as the late James Allen. But I just want to point out he was an absolutely wonderful guy. And yeah, he died so suddenly. And it wasn't long after I was having conversations with him that he passed away.
We don't really know if he was poisoned or not, but the fact he had high levels of heavy metals in his system is fact. And I know someone that I asked about James Higgins or James Allen, and this individual actually tried to get the Savannah Police Department to investigate, and they wouldn't. So no one's really willing to look into it, which is really, really sad. And again, I'm not saying there's a cover-up in the Savannah Police Department. I'm just saying that people had tried to, get officials to look at it at least, and they won't. So that's really sad, in my opinion. I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but I feel like I've got to know him a little bit because not only have I watched his documentary, it's called 0 Point, the Fluxliner ARV. So if you Google 0 Point, the Fluxliner ARV, you will get his documentary on YouTube. Also, if you Google Higgins James, this is just the way I would suggest Googling it to get this document. Higgins James, 0 Point, the story of film. So if you Google Higgins James, 0 Point, the story of film, you will get the written, I guess you would call it a thesis or a proposal, whatever you want to call it. He wrote up for his profession, to his professors to get them to approve this documentary, this project.
Okay.
And he gives all the background of it. And it's available online. And he talks about his conversations with Mark McCandlish. And it talks about his conversations with, for example, Brad, not really conversations, email exchanges with Brad Sorensen and all the other research he did and the other evidence for the Fluxliner in addition to Brad Sorensen's account. So it's a really good document that gives you some background. That
was a bit of a side road we went down, but I'm very glad we did that because James Allen or James Higgins he's worth remembering. And we went down this road essentially to we were talking about the potential reality of the ARV, which sounds like we both believe in, and is referenced in this particular document, these notes by Eric Davis. So that's why we went down that little side road.
There's a lot of reasons why I believe that alien reproduction vehicles of many types, in addition to the actual Fluxliner ARV, are real. But one of the reasons why I believe it, this is just because of the research that I've been doing for the last 10, 15 years. I've done a lot of reading about this, a lot of online research, reading a lot of papers, a lot of theories, talking to a lot of people. I believe I understand the physics of how it operates. This is only one line of physics, and then I will move directly on away from this. But I'm convinced that the Fluxliner ARV and probably the TR-3B, which Tom DeLonge stated as a real craft, his insiders told him that it utilizes a self-organizing plasma of mercury isotope 199, which produces a double layer, which is one layer positive ions, another layer of electrons. But these electrons are actually in a superconducting mode. They have turned into Cooper pairs, which allows them to actually interact with the vacuum or the ether, or what's sometimes called the electron-positron sea. And by doing so, they can create an extremely powerful bubble of what's called magnetic vector potential, that when you apply that vector potential in an asymmetric way with a sharp enough gradient, you actually get a warp drive effect. And I'll move on now. I've said enough.
We're going to come back to that conversation and talk about the phenomenon known as EVOs in connection with all of that. I would like to do that with you in the future. But yeah, let's continue on going into our dive into this document.
Yep. At the end of page 4, this is another interesting nugget that gives credence to this document. Is actually this letter, I should say, from Willard Miller was indeed written by him and is real. He asked for help locating a Mr. Joe Zucchero, who was connected to a company called One Mark Inc. in regards to some type of pepper spray. Now, I've looked this name up in this company, and there's a page on LinkedIn for this individual, and this company one mark is listed. So this is a real person in a real company. So that's
yet another level of detail, just obscure, arcane detail that happens to be exactly right.
Exactly. Everything in this document is authentic. And the few things that seem odd or perfectly explainable once you understand the context. So we need to move on because there's a lot of interesting little things like this. Now, if we move on to page 5, let me make sure I'm on the correct page. Yes, I am on page 5 of it. Now, we're back to the actual Admiral Wilson document, no longer on that letter. On
Davis's
page
notes.
5, on the Davis notes. On page 5, Admiral Wilson begins by mentioning that Oak Shannon is difficult to contact anymore due to being in and out of the hospital. Then he goes on to say that...
Did we do any research on Oak Shannon's health at that time? Is that known?
I am not 100% sure of that. I know different researchers have contacted Oak Shannon. He's a real person.
He's real, but he's tough to get answers out of as well.
Yeah, a couple people I think have managed to talk with him, and he did admit to basically, or at least his statements indicate he did indeed know Admiral Wilson. He did not deny knowing him. He admitted that, he...
Didn't Wilson deny knowing Oak Shannon, which is a very odd thing?
He may have somewhere. I would have to really think about that.
I thought that he did, but that Oak Shannon did not deny that.
Well, Admiral Wilson has issued over the years several letters to different people, telephone denials, email denials that have been floating around the internet. And they are circulating around, and it's hard to keep them straight because there's been so many. But it's very possible he did deny it. But we know from Oak Shannon, from his interview with Billy Cox, that the interview indicated yes, he did know Admiral Wilson. But just to continue with the letter, not the letter, excuse me, the notes.
The notes, yeah.
Yeah, and when I get sidetracked, I get a little bit confused, so I apologize for that. But Admiral Wilson then mentions he had been replaced as director of the Defense Intelligence Agency by Admiral Lowell Edwin Jacoby, and that he came to the test site special area, and the test site is a term used repeatedly for the whole Area 51 complex, so people know that, to wrap up projects that he began in 1998 because his successor, Admiral Jacoby, couldn't be bothered due to the lack of time and knowledge. And he also mentions the whole trip was set up by the NNSA, or the National Nuclear Security Agency. And as we go down the page, he mentions how a pair of individuals, Rich and Doug, who were members of the AFIO, or Association of Former Intelligence Officers, talked about Eric Davis. They sent him copies of his NASA papers, his Pacific Air Forces orders, his identification, Lockheed slides. I was not familiar that Eric Davis actually did any presentations for Lockheed, but I don't doubt it at all due to his background. Then it talks about how Rich and Doug recommended that Admiral Wilson should speak with Davis about his career in the DIA, the history, the agency, the mission, and so forth. But this is what's critical. He mentions how he read through it, and he realized what Eric Davis really wanted to discuss.
Can I just jump in? I want to ask you a question here. Have we done research on this Admiral Jacoby? I think it might be Jacoby or Jacoby. Do we have information on him? And do we know who Rich and Doug might be?
Jacoby, he became the next director of the DIA. Beyond that, I've done research on all these individuals. I can just only recall what stands out as important to me. So I don't remember anything really important about Admiral Jacoby that really pops into my mind at this
But
time.
he's the right kind of person in the context of this letter, it sounds like,
Yeah,
or this note.
exactly.
And as far as the identity of Rich and Doug, do we have a hint as to who these are, or was that?
I believe that certain researchers did indeed find their last names and contacted them.